What's going on, family? Welcome to Trutha Talks. I got a special guest for you all. Not a stranger to the channel. I got my brother Cam in the building. What's going on, bro?
Yeah, what's going on, man? Appreciate you having me back on, man.
Man, it's an honor to have you on. We had a really good conversation last
Hey,
time,
yeah,
talking about your double single that you had released before. His name is slipping my mind, but I just know healing was in. He said, "I'm
yeah. To
healing"
whom it may
was part
concern,
of.
I'm healing. Yes, sir. Yeah.
To whom it may concern, I'm healing. There we go. So, man, you dropped an amazing double single, and today we're going to talk about your new song, "Man of the House," and we're going to
Yeah.
talk about all the different topics surrounding it. Because one of the dope things that I love about Cam is he's not just a rapper. He he's a messenger. I mean, he always has something to talk about. Like he doesn't waste any lines. Everything he's saying, he fitting in some type of meaning to it.
Absolutely.
Whether it's him telling his testimony, talking about past experiences, things he's been processing, and I love that he always comes with a message. And he definitely didn't come up short on this one. Man, I love this new song, and I just want to kind of use this conversation to really get a deeper understanding of like some of the inspirations. So, what were some of the
Yeah,
inspirations that you had for "Man of the House"?
for sure. Well, first of all, bro, that's high praise, man. Thank you. I appreciate that for real.
It's
Cause
all
like
love.
I'm very intentional about like when it comes to songwriting, song structure, the sonics, everything. Everything's very intentional. So to hear that that's translating means a lot for real. So thank you.
Hmm.
Um, Man, the inspiration behind this song, it really started with a lot of self-reflection, similar to the last double single. As I've kind of embarked on this healing journey over the last 2 going on 3 years, I'm just at a place now where I feel not only ready, but also equipped to share a lot of what I'm learning about myself and just in general through this journey, because I don't want to just talk about necessarily my experiences. I want to offer some practical, things for the listener or for whomever to be able to glean from. So with this song, kind of get into some of the nuances of that healing journey. So specifically dealing with healing my inner child. That's like the underlying
Hmm.
theme. And so for me, that process started with just a lot of reflection on things and memories that came to mind from like my childhood that maybe at the time I couldn't put a certain emotion or feeling to, or I just didn't understand
Right.
because as a kid, it's only so much that we can do developmentally. So
Not for sure.
as an adult looking back, being able to attach emotions to things and to reconcile feelings about things and to understand the full context of certain things, that's really where the whole concept of man of the house came from. So on the song specifically, though, I'm just kind of uh, telling the story of my upbringing, telling the story of my childhood, um, touching on some of the things, some of those things I've been reflecting on and
Hmm.
reconciling, and just ultimately pointing to how God still used all of that to mold me into saying the man that I am now. So it's a lot more, but I'm sure we're gonna get into it. But that's like a little brief
Man,
synopsis.
I appreciate it. Yeah, definitely. So let me ask you this: what or okay, so you gonna have to forgive me in advance. I'm gonna have a lot of two-part questions. So
Hey, that's cool.
uh, the
Let's
first
dive
part of
into it.
it you could touch on, but then you can kind of weave it into the second. But first part is what was your view of manhood growing up, and
Mm,
how has it evolved now? I don't know like your full experience with like church or God or like
yeah,
when you came to Christ, but like how has like your view of manhood and just this whole idea of being the man of the house, how has it
for sure.
evolved?
Man, that's a great question, bro. I think as a kid, so for context, I guess I should give some context to
Hmm.
this. I grew up in a Christian household, both my mom, my dad, both believers. So I
Hmm.
grew up going to church, every Sunday, prayer meeting, and all that stuff. Um, and in my household, my dad was in the military. So for a lot of my younger years, probably up until I was about 7, 8 years old, he'd be deployed for a couple 7, 8 months at a time, um, kind of coming back and forth. So it's like I think as a child, I saw the role of manhood as like a provider, hard work, um, kind of like being like the breadwinner, like those type of
Hmm.
things, all
Yeah.
of a lot of the, I think, emotional pieces that I now know are involved in manhood. I didn't see any of that or understand any of that as a child. Um, and so the way I believe the second part of the question was just how has that evolved? I
Yeah.
think
So how you looking at it now?
now specifically being on like just this whole healing journey that I've been on, it's like I'm seeing pieces of manhood that I was just it was I had too broad or too narrow of an outlook
Hmm.
to, what I'm saying, see the full scope of what manhood really means.
Right.
There's a mental piece to that, taking care of yourself mentally, being available mentally, having the space to create and um, you know, uh and just work in general. There's an emotional piece to it, being emotionally available, being able to identify your own emotions and express those in a healthy way. There's a physical piece to it, of course, because as a man, there is I believe, a responsibility on us to kind of be that like rock physically for our families.
Hmm.
Um, but as a child, man, I think the situation that I was in, being that, it wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. It was just circumstance. My dad being in the military, being gone a lot, leaving me, my mom, my sister, I kind of had to just naturally evolve into that man of the house role, which is, the whole thing where the song came from. So
Yeah, so taking on responsibilities that otherwise would be given to, like, your dad,
right,
or the
exactly.
combination of mom and dad, working together
Yeah.
and trying to figure out what's best for the household. And that's definitely an interesting dynamic that we don't really think a lot about, especially like in, like, I think, black households.
Hmm.
So I can speak from my experience where, I was raised in what initially started off as a two-parent household with, my mom and dad. But
Yeah.
I can't even remember how old I was. I want to say I was maybe 5 or 6 when they separated, and so
Right.
that completely changed everything. It was a
For
completely
sure.
different experience. I think for me, most of my view of my mom was completely different when my dad was there, and
Mm.
same thing with my dad. Like, when they were both together, I had a completely different view of them both, and I was going to my dad typically, so I would run to him. He was my
Yeah.
best, he was my friend. He was, the person that if I wanted something, he would get it, or
Mm.
if I wanted to do something, if I wanted to play games, he played games with us. He do all these different things. My mom was more of the disciplinarian. She was the one that would pretty much
Lay
make
down
sure,
the law.
make sure we're fed, lay down the law when
Yeah.
needed, and often was needed with us, me and my
Yeah.
two brothers. So it was like my experience uh, completely shifted not having my dad around. And so but I don't typically think about uh, children of people that are in the military,
Yeah.
where how that puts you in the dynamic where it feels you have a father, but there is a
Yep.
separation, but it's
Absolutely.
not a toxic separation necessarily,
Right.
but it's more so separation in terms of, like, career or calling or all of these, various different things that
Exactly.
kind of intersect with it. So I never really have thought too much about that. So I love to be able to gain kind of some of that perspective. What are some of the
Yeah.
things more specifically that you felt were lacking with that? So are you the
Mhm.
oldest sibling, by
I
the way?
am. Yep. I sure
Okay,
am.
yeah. Now I have an older brother. I'm the middle child, and so
He J.
uh,
Cole.
yeah, I know, right? J. Cole to the fullest in that. But I'm the middle
Yeah.
child in my household, and my older brother, when the separation happened, there was a major, I think, shift in his responsibility in the family. So
Mhm.
he had to, and I don't know how this is in other cultures, but I know at least in black, African and black households, what I typically have observed is that the oldest child usually has to step up, and that
Yeah.
same thing was the case for my wife, who is the oldest sibling of her family,
Mhm.
where she had to step up a lot more so. When things shifted, and so my older brother, as a result of all having to do things that I guess he felt like he didn't feel like he should have had to do, he grew a lot of bitterness and resentment toward both my mom and dad. And so I wanted to
Mm.
ask you,
Mhm.
how did that dynamic work for you in a situation where you understood where your dad was, but because you
Yeah.
had to kind of step up, how does that kind of shape how you view the world? And, like, was there any resentment or bitterness that came from that?
Man, I hated the military. I'll tell you that much right now. Like
I
I remember
imagine.
specifically like being, ah man, I must have been. I think this was the last time he got deployed. I probably was
Mhm.
around probably 8, maybe going on 9. And I remember like vividly, like in my mind, as I'm telling you this, like I remember looking out the window as he was walking out to his car and like putting his stuff in the car, getting in the car. Like he looked up at me, kind of, did the nod almost to like, okay, one
Yeah.
more time, type thing, and like drove off. And I remember just sitting there thinking, like, I'm never going to the military. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm not leaving like my family. Like, I don't want to be gone from like family and stuff that long.
Mhm.
But I think I never, as a child, I don't remember placing any of that like uh those feelings of, man, I wish this wasn't happening on like my mom or dad, because I was like, hey, this is his job, this is what he does to put food on the table for
Yeah.
us. I just looked at it more so as like, man, why is the world a place that we need these constant like deployments to protect us from all these countries, and like what is
Hmm.
all this stuff? Like why is the world like this? So I definitely place
Ah,
more of that
okay.
on just like I think that's how my outlook on the world kind of started to mold, because like I said, I grew up in a Christian household, so I'm hearing, all we talk about the world and the church and all that, but then I'm
Yeah.
seeing like the effects of the world and how that just inadvertently affects the family union when you have
Right.
a parent in the military who has to be gone, serving the country, trying to keep us safe from foreign threats and things like that. And in turn, I think on the home front, it just like naturally there were some things I had to step up and do, because at the time mom's doing all she can, she's taking on double. And so for me, it's
Hmm.
like, whether I'm helping my sister with her homework or walking her to the bus, picking her up from the bus stop, helping her get food, just little things like that. But there was
Yeah.
also, I think, some stuff that I put on myself that I probably didn't necessarily have to. But as a kid, you're just trying to like, fill in the void. Like you don't have the ability to process and say, okay, I don't really need to touch that because that's really none of my business. But you're just like,
Right.
well, there's a need. I'm the oldest. I gotta do it. You just kind of like make
Yeah.
that
Sense of
assumption for
responsibility.
sure. And I think as I've gotten older and reflected on some of that, it's like I'm coming to terms with the fact, or I think it's more so giving myself grace is what's kind of been going on. It's like, no, like those things weren't your fault. They weren't
Hmm.
like your parents' fault. It was just circumstance. And even in the midst of that, God's still good. And so it's like looking back, reconciling that, and then seeing how God was still good. You know what I'm saying? Through all that. So you
No, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing how you kind of were able to flip all of that, um, kind of flip it around and really see how God still was in it, and even the things that you got out of it. So you were able to probably have a different sense of responsibility as a young
yeah,
person and appreciation for that than like maybe a lot of our peers may have had,
for
that
sure.
are in our age who just completely uh, may not have that experience, or even me. Like, like I said, I'm the middle child, and I was for a good portion of my life used to having my brother, knowing that he had my back and he would help me to figure stuff out, almost to the point where it was like, I didn't even really fully appreciate every contribution he was giving, because it was just kind of
Mm.
like, if anything, I was turning him away a lot. I'm like, no, I don't want this, or no, I kind of
Like,
want to
yo,
make
leave
my
me
own.
alone, bro. Like
He was
you're
trying to make the path easier sometimes, and I didn't
yeah.
even want that. I'm like, no, I want to figure it out, which
Mhm.
not smart, but I can see how that could be really beneficial, because you
For
were able
sure.
to kind of learn stuff a little bit faster. But there's a verse that was coming to mind when I was listening to this song and like preparing for this, and
Yeah.
it it's really interesting when we put it in positions like someone like you or other kids that are like the oldest that have to fill in for areas that our fathers typically would be in. And it's First Timothy 5:8, where it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, when
Whew.
I first heard this scripture, I started to really hear this scripture a lot when I got married.
Yeah.
And I took this to heart. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I didn't know there was anything that could be worse. I mean, I don't mean this in a like mean way when you say like being worse than an unbeliever, but as somebody that does believe in Jesus,
Yeah.
when I saw a scripture that said that you're worse than an unbeliever in the eyes of God, that just completely, I was like, wow,
You're
that
like,
that
yo, I
set me
gotta
off.
provide like
I'm like, I
immediately.
gotta be a provider. So I've
Yeah.
taken that to heart and internalized that, like, man, like men do have to understand the importance of that. There's a lot of men that don't get that. And so on one end, I think that it's amazing that you have that already. You have that really going for you because you've been in that position. But it's one of those things where it's not, it also on the flip side wasn't God's order for you to be in that position
Right.
necessarily to have
Mhm.
to in any way provide. And I understand some of it you said like was on you, where you was like, hey, I just see it and you wanted to. And that just kind of shows, the heart that you have to want to,
Yeah,
help the family out, and you understood the bigger picture.
for
Again, another
sure.
thing. I'm just at this point, I'm just giving you all type of
It
flowers
no,
with
it's
it because
hey, I
not a lot of
appreciate
us
it,
have
bro. That's
that.
facts. No, we did. I seen this is like off topic, but I seen someone did a campaign where they were like giving men flowers, like literally like physical roses, and they were
Mhm.
just asking, "Have you ever given a flower?" And they're just like, "No." Like many of them were on the verge of tears because it's like that type of recognition, acknowledgement.
Yeah,
Like I think men, we really need that. It's not something that we might go out necessarily like craving and like itching for, but it's like it
yeah.
does something very special to us to get that. So I appreciate that, man. And what
No,
you're saying is
definitely, man.
absolutely, absolutely facts. Because Man, I think it definitely turned me into a more nurturing, like, sensitive, gentle man. Like, I think that's the one of the most positive things I gleaned from that experience. But also I think it gave me, on the other hand, um, what I found myself doing a lot as I've gotten older is always trying to like reclaim time. Like
Hmm.
if I, for example, if I
Yeah.
plan a day of me just chilling and something comes up, I'm heated because I'm like, no, this was my time. And
Yeah.
like as I spent time just looking back and reflecting, I'm like, yo, I think I'm like that because as a kid, I felt, I guess, obviously I internalized this, I guess, but
Hmm.
I felt like that time was kind of taken away from me. Time that should have been like my own to do just, regular child stuff.
Right.
So it's, and there's more, but little things like that is what I've kind of been trying to work through. And so
Hmm.
you see, even on this song, man, like the hook of this song to me is so beautiful, because it's like, so it says he was just a boy when he learned to be a man, turned the house into a home. Now he's trying to own the land. Life ain't all so bad. So it's like this, the duality of life.
Yeah.
So you got the circumstances, things that happen, many things that just like coincidentally happen that really aren't anyone's fault. It's just life. And there's positives and negatives that come from that. And so to be able to, I think it takes a certain level of just growth and maturity to be able to take both of those, come to terms with them, accept them, and move forward to continue to
Hmm.
try to make something positive out of both the positive and the negatives. So that's kind of what the back and forth tension on the song is. So you get the real aggressive, the I want all that stuff,
Yeah.
which is just the the frustration, the anger, all that stuff that's been internalized. Letting that go in the verses as I'm retelling my story, and then the hook comes in where it's like, but remember, there's purpose in everything.
Yeah.
God is still good regardless. All of that. Life ain't all so bad. So
Nah, man, that's tough, man. I love it.
for
I
sure.
love it. Yeah, it just put the song in even more perspective. And just for those watching, if you haven't heard, his song is called "Man of the House,"
Yeah.
and it
I
I
stream
actually
that.
I was on point today, man. I put the link in the description way before the video even started,
On
so the
point
link
with
is
it.
in the description for you all to check that song out
Yeah,
after the
please check it
interview, of
out
course, because we got a lot more to get into.
for sure.
I want to continue on this note, and man, we just unpacking a lot. I didn't expect to spend this much on this, but man, like this,
It's real
we're actually
life, man. It's
we're
so
actually
many.
getting to the next layer of this, which is I think the idea that a lot of black people have,
Mhm.
we're Christian, but like just in a grand scheme, which still impacts us, is like this concept of being in survival mode. A lot of black people
Yeah.
operate that way, even when they're in good circumstances. Kind of
Mhm.
like just I'm in survival mode. I'm always making decisions and moving with that in mind. And
For
like
sure.
it's just in my situation, not having my dad around, he was here and there, but like because the relationship with him and my mom failed, there was, you know, it separated him from it shouldn't have, but it separated him from his duties as a
Mhm.
father because
Mhm.
he just used that as kind of like a crutch in
Yeah.
his parenting. And it felt like what far too often we were in survival mode trying to figure stuff out.
For sure.
And I don't and I think even families that are thriving, are together, and have healthy marriage, all these different things, two-parent households, you still see a lot of this kind of survival mode type of stuff,
Mhm.
from, I guess you could say, historical things that have come into play, and just kind of like
Yeah.
this element still playing a role. And I was just thinking, I had this written down because I wanted to make sure I had it exactly the way I thought it originally. But like
Yeah.
as a result of like a lot, whether it's my case of neglect, or in this case, I wouldn't call it neglect. In your case, I would just call it just differences of like purpose and like certain things that life calls you to.
Mhm.
A lot of these circumstances cause a lot of young boys and girls to be put in positions of provider. So
Yeah.
going back to that scripture where they feel that the same burden of First Timothy 5:8 of having to be a provider, a lot of them are put in that position when they're supposed to be the ones receiving provisions.
Mhm.
And that's where it gets really, I think, interesting. So, uh, my question was going to be: do you feel like you were in a situation where you felt like you were doing things to survive or not?
Mm.
In this, did you look at it as survival, or did you just kind of look at it as like, this is my role. I'm the I'm the
Yeah,
person that my mom is leaning on for help from my siblings, and I got to be in like I want to get kind of like insight from you on this.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, during the prime years of, like, him being active duty in the military, my dad and everything, I wouldn't say I was looking at it as like a survival, but I definitely resonate with the feeling the need to provide, because, like, providing for me at the time, of course, I knew I couldn't do that like financially,
Hmm.
but providing, love, providing um nurture, helping, literally, like, helping raise my sister, just doing
Yeah.
some of those, like, um things that you can't put a price value on,
Hmm.
providing in those aspects. I definitely felt the weight of that, and took that responsibility on. Um, but you're absolutely right, man. Because a lot of times when those family dynamics are shifted and the parents not in the home, um, it affects more than just like things relationally.
Hmm.
It affects finances. It affects um, overall well being. If it affects mental health, it affects all these things. And I feel like when you're put in a vulnerable position like that, naturally our instinct, especially as Black
Hmm.
people who in the back of our minds, we know what's out there in the world racially, we know
Yeah.
what's out there in the world, oppressed in terms of oppression and systematically and all this stuff. So it's like we naturally go to this place of like fight or flight. And it's
Hmm.
like we don't necessarily always have to go there because there's not necessarily something that's right on our doorstep trying to like take us out. You know what I'm saying? And I think I think that's really why I've just been so big on pushing like self healing for people, like with this music and just in my life in general. Like these are the conversations I'm having with the homies.
Yeah.
Just as I'm learning things, because I'm like, yo, there's so much. The same way we work our bodies out, in the gym, you can work your mind out the same way by going back and reconciling and healing from some of these things that you
No, that's
didn't even know
facts.
hurt you, that can help you when life situations happen and that survival mode tries to creep back in to say, okay, hold on. There's a healthy way I can go about handling this. It might be a tough situation. It might be something pressing that I need to try to get a hold on ASAP, but I can still do that in a way that keeps me from like losing my mind. You know what I'm saying? I think a
Yeah.
lot of that comes from just dealing with just past traumas and things that are triggering things in us now that we didn't even know would be triggers. So yeah, man.
Oh, exactly. That's real. Yeah. I love that you push, so hard for like healing, especially like amongst like African Americans, because
Absolutely.
I think generally speaking, I think all people groups probably neglect mental health way more than they should,
Yeah.
and spiritual healing in areas of their life that's broken way more than they should. I just, I have a project that's coming out Friday, shameless plug, but
Hey,
like
he
it's been
dropped it.
out on Bandcamp, but it's called Broken Geniuses, where I'm talking about how you got all these people that are broken
Mhm.
and they're just getting fingers pointed at them, and we're not actually dealing with, you know, helping them to heal. We're
Yeah.
just pointing fingers. We're just,
Yeesh.
and they're pointing
That's
fingers
real.
back, and they're trying to figure out. We're all trying to find something to blame
Yeah, everyone's
for this
just blaming
brokenness,
instead of right, right.
but we're
Yeah.
not actually looking at like how can we heal people. Um, it's a lot of ways we can go about healing people. It's a lot of things you can offer to people. I think, and one of the things that I talked about in that project, and also with like some of the like the podcast I did for it, was there's so many different things out there. Like people are, prescribing finding various things that are wrong, and it's just a competition of which one is, more wrong. Is it fatherlessness? The
Mhm.
father is
Like what's
not being
the
in the
yeah.
household to the extent that they should, or is it crime amongst the people groups or the
Mhm.
black people? Is it lack of personal responsibility, individual responsibility? Is it systemic racism? Is it the legacy of systemic racism and
Mhm.
stuff like that? And it just becomes this conversation that gets completely sidetracked. But I think acquiring the skill to talk about all of these things together and like not separating one from the other
Yeah.
is a very important skill in this time, and it also helps us to, because here's the reality. Most, especially on the political side, most prescriptions on both sides don't get the answer done. You try to
Nah,
go to one side
there
and you
ain't
think
no
the answer is
one.
there and
Nah,
it's
man.
not. You go to the other side, you realize the answer isn't there. The unpopular reality that doesn't usually poll well is it's somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere of coming
Yeah.
together. Like obviously
Everybody, it
personal
got to be black or
responsibility
white,
matters,
left or
but
right.
exactly, obviously
Nah,
personal
man.
responsibility matters. Like it's no doubt at all. You got to take accountability for your things that you do. You know, you can control.
Mhm.
You do have some level of control. However, that doesn't negate that the conditions that someone's around is more conducive for
That's
them
what I was just about to
to.
say, bro.
It's like
Yeah.
if you're walking in a house and it's full of traps, mouse traps all over, and you're having to kind of step through every crevice to avoid them. If there are traps out there, then yeah, eventually you might step into one trap and it'll lead you, to getting hurt or getting in a situation that you wouldn't have liked
Hmm.
to have been in. Uh, it's one of those things where identifying it, and then you say, okay, well, what are the systemic things that are out there that are causing it? And some people are arguing, are there still, like in the letter of the law, systemic laws that literally strive to cause this active oppression to this
Hmm.
group? And you say, well, it's not at this point, it is going to be a lot more harder to find to the letter of the law those things. However, one thing we can't deny is, and especially those that are in the body of Christ and
Yeah.
Christians, is if you have sinful people that create systems and create laws and create these different things historically that have done these things. We know historically there's been systemic oppression. Then even if there isn't, let's just go off the assumption, and I'm not even saying that I agree with this, but let's go off the assumption that there is nothing systemic going on. There is
Yeah.
no systemic oppression going on, specifically against like blacks, African Americans. Let's just say if we go off of that assumption, well, if we understand that sin corrupts and that sin is, something that corrupts people, corrupts, really everything
Break
that
it
we
down.
do to an extent,
Yeah.
then how hard is it to believe that the existing legacy of systemic racism in this country would have a detrimental effect that would be
Hmm.
lasting even in past generations who may not have the same obstacles that are out there that maybe in the
Right.
1960s they had. So even if we somehow could come together and agree, okay, currently it's very hard to say it's a smoking gun that this is a racist law here. Okay, if we came together on that, but then it's like, okay, well, what do we do about this history that
Hmm.
still has a lasting impact on the
Absolutely.
mental health, on the ability to build wealth, which many other different people groups have had, a huge leg up against,
Yeah.
black people. So it's one of those things where it's like, I think there is a middle ground that you can actually get the ball moving in and actually get healthy results in. But I think what ends up happening is because we're more interested in dividing on different things and talking past people, what we end up getting is we don't actually get to helping people heal. We just keep
Hmm.
on arguing about different things that are wrong. We keep
Yeah.
arguing back and forth about what's wrong and all that. And I do believe that if we look, I'm sure there's plenty of things that still need to be rectified. And we know, like with voter rights and various other areas, there's some things, redlining that still come into play. So we can obviously say that there are things that still need to be changed
Absolutely.
that don't, systemically impact black people. But it's one of those things where it's like, um, if we're really going to make progress, I think we're going to have to really be everybody on whatever side has to be healing oriented. That has to be their heart. And
Yeah.
that was my tangent. I'm going to pass it on to you.
Nah,
Let
bro.
you chime in if
Listen,
there's anything
bro,
you
I
want to
got
add
it,
to
bro. You was going crazy. That's a
that.
fact. Everything you said is facts, and I feel like when it comes down to it, it's like we we choose to be selfish at like the wrong times. Like there's certain times where putting yourself first is okay. Like if you're pursuing, if you know that if you know you're not okay and you're pursuing your own
Hmm.
healing, you're pursuing um what you need to be a better you so that you can maybe be that person that helps someone else heal an appropriate time. When it comes to these type of conversations where we're talking
Hmm.
about, the nuances of life, like
Yeah.
if I'm talking to one of my white brothers who grew up completely different, had a completely different experience than I did. It's like just because you didn't experience these things doesn't mean that you can outrule the possibility that they exist for me,
Hmm.
someone
Yeah.
completely different. And it's like in that moment, we got to be selfless and have enough, again, like there's enough maturity to say, okay, I grew up in this little one corner of the world in my own, and I have my own personal experience. But this individual over here is an entirely separate human being with their own personal experiences
Right.
and things that they go through. So when in conversation, it's like you were saying, instead of fighting so hard to just be right,
Yeah.
like let's just listen to each other for a second, validate the reality of one another, and maybe learn something, and then and if our heart's in the right place, we'll want to come alongside one another to help solve the issues that are going on in everyone's
Mhm.
lives. So I think, man, again, it just boils down to like perspective and your
Definitely.
mindset, which like is literally also it's like your perspective and mindset are like the two words that keep popping up. Whether I'm talking about like healing or just like uh progression in life in general, it's like those two things are just absolute keys. So if you're gonna be any help to changing the world for the better, you got to change your own perspective first and
Mhm.
expand that beyond what you probably can even imagine. You know what I'm saying? So
No, I love that, bro. Yeah, I think that's very well said. And yeah, and for those watching, I have a pretty, diverse audience, and some people get triggered over little things like this talked about. But my encouragement would be, figure out why you're triggered. Are you triggered
yeah.
because you disagree? Which, hey, you can disagree with, conclusions, that we might come to. We might come to a different conclusion about things that relate to our experience, even our view, of the world, how it's shaped, both with the Bible, but then also in addition with personal
Hmm.
experiences. Feel free to, have a difference of opinion about
Yeah.
our conclusions. But I think what Cam is saying that I think is so powerful is like, hey, have a heart to have empathy and listen, and try to understand and put yourself in, his shoes. Like, coming into this conversation, my bias is, a father that left, just because he didn't really, he had a bad marriage failed,
Yeah.
and he was willing to step away from his full family just to get away from, his wife.
From that
And
relationship.
it was one of those things. So
Yeah.
I have different baggage in that. Whereas Cam's situation is different, but it's easy for me. I have to listen to Cam on that because it's like, oh, I have no point of reference to even speak to that,
Yeah.
and so I can't even approach the conversation how I would like if it were a similar situation to me or like people that I grew up with. Like a lot of friends, my friends didn't have their dad around, and so
Same.
even the people
I
I
saw
was
a lot of
around
that.
had a
Yeah.
completely different experience than me. And I didn't realize how uh, we would interact and how like the things that would come out of our mouths versus like some friends that I made later in life who were used to having two parents and like had a
Hmm.
completely different situation and
Yeah.
the privilege behind it. So even like with privilege, like it's not even just a thing of like, oh, white people have privilege. No, it's black people have certain privileges that other blacks don't have. And it's just one of those things where once you really start to see it from that lens, you can really, I think, move the needle toward growth and healing. And that's why I say this isn't a conversation on, you know, how we're healing just as black people, but it's more so like
Yeah.
when you understand the things that are involved in, and that's where we're going to actually pivot the conversation. The things that are involved in healing, once you start to really get a grasp of that, then it's universal, and it allows for you to get closer to God and understand God's purpose and even allowing those certain things to happen,
Yeah.
and also just how they connect to shaping who God wants us to be. So I'm going to pivot to that, and you touched on this somewhat, but what are some other steps that you took to be able to heal? I know you talked about it in our last conversation,
For
but
sure.
what are some let's get a refresh since the last time
Yeah,
we talked. What are
man.
some things that you've been doing, and what are some of the things that you're seeing come out of these changes that you've been making in your life?
Yeah, so for me, it's been like three main things that I've been doing practically. And like I was saying, it's everyone needs different things in their own personal healing journey. So what works for me might not work for you. You might need something else. But with me, it started with working with a life coach. God literally, like divinely, brought a life coach into my life back. I want to say it was
That's amazing.
early 2021. And this was a guy that I just play basketball with. Like we just hoop. We be at the gym on Saturdays, and I met him there. And he was like, the Lord told me to come talk to you. And it was this crazy moment. But he really um helped me start to just unpack things. Cause obviously he was a little bit older, a bit more experienced.
Hmm.
And so he kind of is the one that got my mind uh programmed to look at the past in the way that I do now. So looking at it like, okay, this happened, but let's try to figure out like the why and the result. Let's not just look at, okay, this happened, this is how I felt. That's the end all be all.
Hmm.
Let's look at the context around it and let's make something out of that. So working with him, um, just doing a lot of reflection, man. It's plenty of times, and I don't really have it like scheduled out, but it's plenty of times where like before I go to bed, I'll just be laying down and I'll sit and I'll think. And 9 times out of 10, if you give yourself a chance to think, your mind will go somewhere.
No, that's
Now be
facts.
careful. You gotta be very careful, of course, where it goes, because there are some thoughts and things that can become detrimental. So those you gotta kind of take hold of and be like, okay, yep, let's exit that. But a lot of times for me, my mind just goes back to my childhood, man, because I got so
Mhm.
many just really dope memories, things that I love. And so even when those good memories pop up, it's like, okay, what made this a good memory for me? Like what was it? Like, let me learn something about myself from this. So all of that's giving me just a greater sense of self. And then the third thing is just doing little self-care stuff, like taking myself on dates, going to the movies by myself.
Hey, that's lit.
Like, it was weird at first. I ain't gonna hold you. So it might be weird if you do it at first, but it's actually a vibe once you get into it. So, doing little things like that, like when I go play ball, man, it's so therapeutic for me, you know.
Man, I
So
miss playing
just yeah,
basketball.
fine, yeah, man, just finding things that uh make your inner child just happy, and that freedom, that liberation you feel when you're engaging in an activity, giving yourself a chance to experience that. Because at the end of the day, we all big kids, man. Like, that same little kid that was in us years ago is still in there. We just got a lot more responsibility now and probably a lot more
No, that's
stress,
facts.
but it's still in there and it's still looking to live life. So those were just a couple, so like reflection, doing different self-care things for myself, and then also talking to somebody. For me, it was a life coach. For others, you might actually really need a therapist, you know.
No,
It
definitely.
might be going back and talking to your parents about certain things that happened in your childhood to make sense of that. um so yeah, I think those three things.
No, that's great, man. I appreciate it, man. I think self awareness is like, especially like for most people, that's like our greatest weakness, like being aware
Yeah.
of, who we are, how we are perceived by other people. Blind spots in us, like, what are our flaws, what are our strengths. Most people know them, but they're just not honest about them. They kind of they
That's the
kind
other
of move
part.
around,
Yeah.
they move around life as if they don't exist. But I mean, once you get a certain point, like maybe in your teens, like teenagers generally aren't that self-aware. They're
Hmm.
still trying to figure out themselves, who they
Yeah,
really
who they
are,
really
or who
are.
they
Facts.
are they being somebody for somebody else. So, but generally once you get into like your 20s, self-awareness is something that like starts to come into play. And it's like, if you press into it and really looking at things objectively, and for me it took getting feedback from people. I'm like, okay,
Mm.
do I come off this way? So whenever I had a bad interaction or a situation happen, I would ask somebody like, yo, am I off in this area? I'm
Yeah,
like,
like,
bro, am
what?
I
Because sometimes
tripping?
you just blind to it. Yeah, you don't know.
I'm like, am I coming off a way? And they're like, well, yeah, you kind of do. I'm like, dang, for real? I'm like, bro,
Why
I'm
do
a
you mean that?
jerk.
Like,
I'm like, I'm a straight up jerk. And I was, it broke
yeah.
my heart a couple of times because I'm like, dang, I thought, the people like secretly like not like me, and I just thinking like I'm just doing me. But no, I started to realize that there were some habits I developed, and I meant well by them, but they were not desirable by, a lot
Hmm.
of people I was around. They were just like, well, that's just how he is. I'm like, well, it don't have to be that way. I
Yeah,
can
bro.
change this.
That's
If I
it
if I
goes,
knew this was
bro.
bad, I would change it.
Absolutely, and it goes right back to just being open, like understanding that, like, somebody might experience something growing up that makes the way that you are come off a certain way to them.
Yep.
Like, so I in school I did psychology for more context. I majored in psychology. So
Oh, that's
all of
dope.
this, the timing of everything, me doing that and then embarking on my own healing journey mentally and all this stuff is just like divine. But like understanding how our minds are wired so much by experience, especially when
Hmm.
we're younger, we don't know how to like process the reality that what we just like took in might not actually be what it really is. We just might have took it a certain way. So we internalize that and we get older. And so now when someone maybe talks to us in a raised tone, it's like, oh, they mean. When it's like, nah, that's just how they are. Like, they just
Yeah.
loud, bro. Like, they just loud.
No,
And
that's
so
facts.
and so being able to be open enough to for someone to say, "Hey, man, I really don't like being talked to like that." Like, what I'm saying, and you taking that as like, "Oh, word, okay, we homies, we cool. I'll try to watch that for you." And same
Exactly.
on the other side of things, understanding that like just because something comes off to you in a certain way doesn't mean that that is exactly how it is, and uh having the awareness, like you said, to just seek out the truth in things. I think that's key.
No, that's fire, man. Okay, I got one heavy one to wrap up with.
Gotta
Man,
land the plane.
it's been a crazy conversation, bro. I've been enjoying this, man.
Always, bro.
And I hope y'all are enjoying. If y'all are enjoying this, do me a quick favor. I know y'all seen this. Hit the thumbs up, like this
Hit like.
video, And if you're not subscribed to the channel, I encourage you to subscribe. We got a lot of cool stuff going on. And man, if y'all have any questions, also feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm looking at the chat, so don't feel like I'm not. I just, you know,
Yeah,
I'm trying to make sure navigate, listening, and all that. But you all are dropping some really good things in there as well, and I appreciate what y'all are sharing. So, I ain't gonna lie, a little bit above my head, So we'll touch on those probably toward the end if we
yeah,
can.
for sure. We
But
can
feel
go through some
free
of those.
if you got any specific questions for Cam. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer those. So
Absolutely.
this last thing I want to touch on is pertaining to the church, and I'm gonna throw it out there right now. This may be experience based. Everybody has a different experience with the
Yeah.
church in this regard. I know my experience has been, being in predominantly black churches. So that, I've had some multicultural different experiences. I've had been under a pastor that was white. So I've had various experiences in the church.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about, is the church failing men? Like, do you feel
Ooh.
that there is a aspect of the church that isn't really speaking to the men, or like trying to help them to both heal, understand themselves, understand uh, the value of having community in the church? Like, like,
Hmm.
are we? I know in the context of the black church, a lot of young men aren't really. They're not turning up as much as like in the white churches, where it seems like it's more men.
Hmm.
And some of them from conversations I've had with people. But what are your thoughts, kind of like on the men's place in the church today?
Man, that's a great question. So before I get into that though, the observation you made about seeing how it's like seems like more young men showing up in predominantly white churches than black churches, like I had an experience. So I went to a predominantly black church, but then also in like my latter teenage years, a predominantly white church. And one thing I did notice was that when there were like men's events or men's ministry events at the white church, it was like all the men, they would bring their sons, and it was like this, like almost like mandatory.
Hmm.
Whereas in the black church, it's kind of like, sporadic. Like the guy, like the older men might show up and be like, "We're leaving the kids, forgetting the kids,"
Yeah.
or like, it'd be like sporadic. And I think that goes back down to just like experiences growing up in terms of like understanding what manhood is. Like manhood, very well, you need community to cultivate that properly. You know what I'm saying? You need emotional awareness, mental awareness. You need all of these things. It's not just about just being brawn. You need brains, brawn, health in all areas. Um,
Right.
and I feel like the role that the church plays in that um, is just that kind of like that coach that you had growing up that would just like push you. It felt like to your limits. And you're like, why is he so hard on me? But it's because he saw
Yeah.
something in you. And I think the role the church has, not just necessarily specifically a pastor or like one person, but the whole church body, is to cultivate and push people into spaces to where they can grow and grow holy and be like whole. And so that's why I love my church absolutely, because there's guys in my church that absolutely have started to cultivate that, and they're like,
That's
they be hitting
nice.
us up, making group chats like, fellas, we got to get together. If nothing else, I need it. You know what I'm saying? And it's like,
Yeah.
so seeing folks lead with that example, it's like, man, bro, asking for help. That's crazy. I thought we weren't supposed to ask for help. Like, just stuff like that. So leading by example, and it can be anyone within the church body. But I do think that specifically for men, we do need to be more intentional, I think would be the word,
Hmm.
about cultivating that, because like that church body, that's like the hub where we're supposed to get
Hmm.
um a little piece of heaven on earth. Like we're supposed to get that. We get obviously our life philosophy and our teachings from the Bible, but to see that in play, we should get that
Yeah.
in our church communities and our church bodies. So and that goes for manhood as well, and that's why I really love seeing like multi-generational churches too, because you get like
Hmm.
the older experienced men helping maybe the uh middle-aged men, helping the young men, helping the kid, like and it just trickles down. I
Yeah,
feel
it's
like that's
dope.
how it really should be for sure.
No, I think I agree with everything you said. I think there was a key thing that I noticed when you were talking about, like, in the context like of your church, and how, like, you mentioned specifically, you know, men reaching out to other men, trying to connect
Yeah,
outside of,
outside of
the
them,
actual
yeah,
church. And
yep.
that's the crucial thing that I think. I don't know if it's because of tradition. I mean, you know, black churches are dope. Like, we got great music.
Mhm.
Preaching is very entertaining, very theatric, a lot of cool stuff to go, to the in church experience. And I don't know if it's because of all of these other things. Now, obviously, other churches have that too. It's not just unique to, like, culturally to black
Yeah.
people, but we got, I think there's just kind of a loss of focus because it's a lot easier to just, rely on the fact that you're a building that's constantly people are going to walk
Mhm.
by, and whenever they're down or feel like they're hopeless, they can just come. I don't know if they just, we just rely heavy on that now, but there is something to be said about actually reaching out to people and connecting with
Yeah.
people in real life, outside of the
Right.
four walls of the building, and really, especially with men, because I found that it's way more effective. I found way a much better response when the focus was on that person, what they're going through, what their situation is, versus trying to like invite them just to church. I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, uh, the building is a luxury. The church wasn't founded, you know, to be a building or
Not
anything
at
like
all.
that in the scriptures at all. So having a building is a luxury, but it could, church is, people at the end of the day. It's, you know, people coming together, one mind, one accord, you know,
Yeah.
under the belief of Jesus, in the gospel. So it's one of those things where I like that, and I also like that you said intentionality. You with men, I don't know, I don't. A lot of the outreach that I hear mostly about in the like context of like the black church is in reference to men, getting men there, because women typically that's a place they love to be at, like
Mhm.
generally, like there's a lot of women that come to church. Doesn't mean we need efforts to evangelize with them, but the intentionality for women is going to be different than the intentionality of men.
Mhm.
Like men, you have to be very intentional. You also have to come in, I think it was I forget the word he used, but Dr. Eric Mason from Philly had
Yeah.
talked about, I think he called it three-way apologetics, and I only remember one of the directions of the ways, but specifically the one way that a lot of African Americans, when trying to outreach to other black people, one of the things that he mentioned is we have an additional obstacle because we have the legacy of slavery. So you have some
Mhm.
black people who look at Christianity as the white man's religion,
Yep.
and so that's a
Yep.
whole nother baggage that comes into play with a lot of
Facts.
evangelizing to young black men, especially now in the world we're in now, where um, people are more, really consumed with culture. Culture is, God to a lot of people, and I'm not against culture. There's some awesome things with culture. It was
Mhm.
funny. My wife and I, we did a video, a short on YouTube the other day that I posted where I was talking about culture, and somebody had responded, was like, "Oh, same, this person is talking about culture with an expensive outfit," and I was like, it's funny you think that, because it was my outfit in total didn't even like that. My hat probably was the most expensive, and it was on sale. It was like a $20 hat,
I
but
didn't
it
even
was
know
one
the
of those
outfit
things
was
where like
expensive for the
I'm
video.
like, how did you know? I had no name brand stuff. Literally, no brand name brand. Like I
Oh
think
gosh.
I had a jacket that was like from Shein, which anybody that knows Shein that is around women knows that Shein is very inexpensive.
She ain't the plug. I don't
Really
care what
nice
y'all talking
though.
about. She ain't
Really
the
nice
plug.
stuff, bro. Like crazy stuff on there, but like
Yeah.
very reasonable, like cheap. You're not paying a lot of money. But like my outfit wasn't even worth $75, let alone being expensive or name brand. My hat
Oh my
wasn't even
gosh.
a New Era hat, I don't think. So it's one of those things where it's like, but that perception, that had made me laugh. I just laughing about that. But a lot of people don't understand like how like they're consumed with culture, and
Mhm.
they're also hearing you think about, unfortunately, when you think about Christianity, a lot of people default towards like that narrative of it being the white man's religion, which is so far from any history, any Christian history. If you really understand if you really understand Christian history, you'll know it's
Yeah.
not the white man's religion
Nah.
at all, but
Y'all
not
better
at
go find out
all.
where it originated. Like
But
where
that's what it
where
seems like to a lot of people. So I mention that because having to dispel a lot of myths that are out there about it, and also helping people to understand, even like the whole slavery argument. Like they'll say, "Oh, well, when they enslaved the Africans, what did they give them? The Bible?" No, they gave them the slave Bible, which is a different Bible. Here's the thing: if the Bible was so oppressive, then why would you give uh, a fake Bible, a Bible that was missing several key passages, all dealing with freedom?
absolutely.
It's like, yo, if so, that's one thing that gets left out. A lot of people don't know that the slave Bibles took out any liberating passages or any
It sure
passages that
did.
spoke against man stealing, which was the type of slavery that the Bible strongly condemned. And even the references of slavery in the Bible have nothing to do with stealing men or have anything.
Mhm.
It's voluntary based on the situation. It's really indentured servant,
Mhm.
servitude,
Paying
where
back the
they're
debt, things
paying
like
back
that,
a
yeah.
debt. So, but we have to explain all of these different things, and that's something that oftentimes gets left out is the level of apologetics we have to do. You have to have that understanding, and a lot of people don't understand. Some people don't
Yeah.
have answers to these questions, and they're trying to evangelize. So I think all of that being said, it's easier to just focus on who is coming to church, where you don't have to do you have to do
Mhm.
very little work to get women to come to church. Very little work to get women to come to church. They pretty much are, and as a result, most churches cater to women, and they cater to that demographic very strongly. It's catering to music, a lot of the gospel music. I don't know, I'm probably getting controversial now, but like a lot of the gospel music is a lot more, and Christian music in general is really feminine. And like it's not like the Fred Hammond and the older, the 80s and 90s type of gospel where it just like
Yeah.
had a little bit more of a, it wasn't necessarily, it felt like a little bit more something like guys could embrace more. But a lot of it now,
Mhm.
I think I heard Ruslan say it, but it's like getting a wet kiss from Jesus type of Christian music, which I just thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like Jesus
Yeah,
giving you a
man.
wet kiss. There's a
But
lot of that type
I feel,
of
yeah,
music.
and I feel like for a lot of guys too that grew up with that mentality of like anything that's like emotional or
Hmm.
emotive is like negative or like I can't show none of that because that's not
Hmm.
I can't be a man if I'm showing that. Like that girl with that type of like philosophy,
Yeah.
I think it's hard for them to connect in settings like that where they feel
Yeah,
like,
this
okay,
specifically
everything
is catering to
around me is
feminine.
literally trying to pull some type of emotional
Yeah,
response out of me. That's not cool. When in reality, it's like, nah, bro, that's just the spirit trying to get you, but like
right.
trying to get your attention. But like, I feel like that's why we need, man, we just need balance and like
Yeah,
connection with the Holy Spirit. Cause again, we go back to nuance. Like my church, the community that surrounds my church might be different than the community that surrounds yours. Like yours might just be all black people in that area. And that's
hmm,
who like so y'all do things a certain way because these are the people that are directly arm's length away. For me, it's a very uh multi-ethnic, very diverse setting because we deal with a lot of college students too. So we in the college
yeah.
school. And so it's like we don't know who coming through on a Sunday. So we do literally like bro, Hispanic Heritage Month is like my favorite time at church. We be doing like they got songs in Spanish, then they'll do like a
Oh, that's
CCM
nice.
joint, then a more God like they really mix everything up for that reason. You know what I'm saying? So we just gotta be in touch with the spirit to guide those leaders in the church body, you know what I'm saying, as to how they should um, conduct things within the walls of the church, but then also when you're talking about reaching the community and things outside, how to do that in a way that just relates to people, man. Because like you said, bro, a guy that grew up rough and tough with no emotional
Yeah.
like awareness yet, it's gonna be hard to get brother to come into a service that's like that, you know.
Yeah,
You
if
can
it's
reach
catering
him,
specifically, and that's why you shouldn't cater to like definitely shouldn't cater just to a specific
right?
gender like to that degree. If you're trying to be an evangelistic ministry that reaches all people, I get it. Like, yeah, you're gonna culturally, yeah, you want to definitely play to that if you feel like it'll make someone and be able to connect with God on a better level. So I don't have any issue with like if you have a demographic that is more in tune with like CCM, or if like you said, like you had mentioned, like Hispanic. Um, and having Spanish songs. Like I think that's great. But I think when it gets to the point where like you're going out of your way because you're like, we have women here, and so we're gonna make this
Yeah, we're just gonna
very emotionally driven for them because we know that they might connect. 'Cause I think that's also just unfortunate too because I'm like, um, I don't know that necessarily scripture says that like just because you're a woman you're going to connect with God this way because you play this
right.
type of music or
Yeah,
whatever. I think it's also closed minded to
that's
God.
also
But I
going
do
to
we
fair.
know like there's certain notes that are played that can evoke certain emotion even if you're not in the church. Like you ever been in a movie or like watched a show and then a certain music in the background you're
Yeah,
like why am I
just like
why all of a
oh,
sudden do I feel
okay.
wait what's this where's this coming from? But yeah, like that's certain notes do that, and I think we just have to get back to when it comes to men, we have to really, like you said, follow the spirit. We have to really get back to what the scripture says. It says for us to go and make disciples.
Hmm.
It didn't say. It just said go and make disciples in all nations. We're not supposed to just make women disciples or go make even just men disciples. You want to make disciples. Whoever will
Yeah,
hear and receive the gospel, you want to go to them, and even those, and you can't be intimidated by just someone on the outward at the end of the day because God knows the heart of the person and God
absolutely.
can reach them. And it's not us anyway. We're just really being stewards of truth that we've received, and we're
Yeah,
stewarding well by sharing it with people. And God has to do the rest. We're just planting seeds at the end of the day.
absolutely. Literally just meeting people where they at. Like I think of story in the Bible of Jesus and the woman at the well. I think that was one of the, there's many examples, but I think that's my personal
Oh
favorite
yeah,
one,
that's a
just
good one.
because like the way that Jesus approached this woman, and like if you look through how many verses it took him to actually get to the point where he was like, I am Jesus. Like he
Yeah.
talked to her literally about water, what they both was there for, water. Like talking, like asking her for a drink, knowing good and well that she would be like, you not from around here. We don't really do
Yeah.
that. Like, just the regular like norms of the times he played off to establish a connection with her in a conversation that naturally led into sharing the gospel.
Yep.
And so I feel like that approach is just so key. So if we're going out and we are looking to um bring more men inside the church for the ultimate goal of creating a community of just healthy manhood or whatever it may be, understanding that when you meet these dudes in the community, it's not going to
Yeah.
be anything that you're
Expect
preaching in
them to
your
be
mind.
rough.
Have no preconceived notions. Just whatever is in front of you, engage and be present with that human being right there in front of you.
Yeah, we have to mean. Yeah, we have to mean it when we say "come as you are." And that doesn't mean stay as you are, but we got to
Right,
mean it when we say "come as you are" and work with people where they're at and provide them that space and room to grow. Like
for sure.
everybody's starting out, it's messy, and
Yeah,
the scripture refers to new believers as babies. So I mean,
absolutely.
I'm gonna have my first child soon, man, by the grace of God, and it's
Man,
like, that baby's gonna be, baby's gonna, be messy. The baby's gonna be learning how
yeah.
to walk. It's not gonna be like a clean process.
Mhm.
Everything's not gonna just be straightforward. It's gonna be a process to it. So, man, I love everything you shared, bro. This has been a great conversation, man. We're
Bro,
almost at an
always,
hour.
bro. No, it don't even feel like that.
Yeah,
Golly.
I'm shocked. Yeah, bro. I appreciate you coming on here,
Yeah,
man.
man.
Again, I want to shout you out for your transparency. I feel like you're bringing something to Christian hip hop that not a lot of guys are doing, which is you're telling your story, you're um, glorifying God through
Absolutely.
trials, tribulations, things that are going on in the world, in your world, in where you're from, and all of that.
Yeah.
But you're doing it in such a way, but you're always pointing to the hope that is in Jesus that you have found, and you're testifying. So I love that about it, man. New single, "Man of the House,"
Man of the
out on
house.
all platforms.
Everywhere you stream music, go run it up.
Yeah,
Run it up.
link is right here in the description. So if you look down there, yeah, go ahead. I mean, hit the thumbs up, but go ahead and go listen to that. Give that song a
On your
spin
way
because it'll
down, make
put
sure you hit the thumbs
everything.
up and subscribe.
Hit the
But then
thumbs
after
up.
that,
Get out of this stream. Go listen to my bro's new song and, man, help him support. He also hit 1 million streams
bro,
on his song "Problematic," which, man, another crazy joint.
that's crazy.
So, man, he's
Yeah,
doing really. God is elevating what he's doing,
absolutely.
and man, you make really good music, bro. I'm real proud of you, and
Thank you, man.
we gotta lock us in one day, man. I
Yes.
got to
Like,
tell me who to contact, and we gonna figure this out at some point.
no, for sure, bro. You just gotta hit me up, man.
We gonna get it locked in, man. But yeah, all of you watching, appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts on this whole conversation. If you enjoyed this, his name is Cam. I believe your ad is Cam Raps, right?
Yep. Cam Raps, KHAM Raps. All social media platforms. You can follow me, connect with me. Let me know what you think of the new single.
Yeah, follow him on Instagram, follow him on Twitter, send him a DM, let him know your thoughts of it, man.
Absolutely.
We need to support our CHH artists, man. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. A lot of them, are going different directions and doing different things. Make sure y'all support guys like Cam, who y'all got to hear his heart. I mean, he shared his heart. He gave you his life experiences. He really
Yeah.
poured out his heart. He pours out his heart in his music. So let's support our brothers that are doing this for Jesus, but doing it in a way that can be evangelistic. He's not just making music for the church, but he's also making music for
Yeah,
people outside the church, and dropping those seeds in them for people and planting
absolutely.
them. So, man, anything else you want to share before we head off?
Nah, man, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be on the platform again, and to just share my heart. 'Cause like you were saying, bro, that's really my intention with music, man. I'm so passionate about it. I love music so much, but I just want to always give people something to chew on, like that. Either it can challenge them, it can uh, make them just know that they're not alone.
Yeah,
Just something that makes people feel, and that's my goal with all this new music I'm dropping this year. It's just to bring some feeling back for folks, man.
amen. Well, love y'all. Take it easy.
Glocks loaded at the opponent, I'm a reach. Stop sewing to get a bonus, that's a reach. I was born to meet the moment, so I feast. No life, feast. You know why? Feast. Glocks loaded.